As we get ready to talk about Ezra and Nehemiah, I always discover about this time in the Bible, let's just recap real quickly the flow of where we get there. Because it's easy to sort of, lose the threads. And so let's just think about where we started, well, at least where we started with the people of Israel. We start with Abraham. After we have those stories that are sort of prehistory, the garden story, the Noah story, but we get to Abraham. He's living in Ur. God says, go west, go to the promised land that I will show you. So he travels, promises him many, many descendants, which are not apparent because his wife is too old to have kids. But we know he eventually has first Ishmael, and that goes a whole different trail. But then he has Isaac. Isaac marries, and Isaac and his wife have the twin boys, Jacob and Esau. And Jacob has 12 sons. The names given to the 12 tribes. Remember, but Joseph, is sold into slavery, goes to Egypt. There's famine in the land. And so through all those events in Genesis, all the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob end up in Egypt. And so we end up with the family of Abraham in Egypt. We turn the page to Exodus. 400 years have passed. Now they're slaves, great multitude of people. We have all the stories of Moses. We have the Exodus. We have them on the verge of the promised land. And as I've been talking about in my sermons, they don't think they can do it. The scouts report the people are big and strong and the cities are well fortified. So they lack faith. They say, let's go back to Egypt. Because of that, they wander 40 years. A new generation comes. Joshua leads them across the Jordan. They fight the battles. They take possession of the land, the promised land, Canaan. And they parcel it out to the 12 tribes. And then we have this period where they're sort of a very loose confederation. That's the period of the Judges, where when an enemy would attack, a leader would arise, somebody like a Gideon or a Deborah or a Samson, fight off the enemy, and then they go back to doing their own tribal things. And eventually the people say, we want a king, like the other countries. They choose one from the tribe of Benjamin, Saul. He doesn't work out very well. Succeeded by David from the tribe of Judah. We talked about David. We talked about all of his trials and tribulations. His son Solomon. This is the height of Israel's power and wealth. Solomon, even though he's the smartest guy in the world, is not really that smart when it comes to women. And his wives, his 700 wives and 300 harem girls, lead him into idolatry. So he ends on a bad note. His son Rehoboam becomes the next king. He's not very bright. And because of his foolish choices, the kingdom splits. And the tribes of Judah and Benjamin in the south remain under the family of David. The Davidic line, the descendants of David, continue to rule in the south. But in the north, Jeroboam is the first king, and his descendants rule in the north, setting up the divided monarchy. And that's what we read about over the last couple of weeks. The divided monarchy. Israel in the north, the 10 northern tribes. Judah in the south, which is Judah and Benjamin. And so as we go through the book of Kings, as we saw, I think last week, it's a mixed bag of kings, but in the north, they're all bad. There's no good kings in the north. In the south, there's some good kings, some bad kings. But where we ended last time was these world powers that keep surrounding this relatively small country of Israel and Judah, these two countries. These world powers keep changing. And the world power in the 8th century BC is the Assyrian Empire. Modern day Syria. And they are a ruthless and brutal empire. and they attack the northern kingdom of Israel, conquer it, take a lot of the people off as slaves and resettle them in their other territories. They bring in other people, conquered people, into that northern area, settle them there, and Israel as a nation isn't so much, lost, the lost tribes, as it is just, like pouring paint into a bathtub. It just all mixes up, and they lose their cohesion. And the religion becomes a hybrid religion of Judaism and all these other religions. And that happens in 722 BC. Right, so 722 BC, Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel, ceases to be in 722 BC. 722 BC. But the southern kingdom is spared from the Assyrian assault. I'm going to turn this off. The southern kingdom is spared for a while. And in world events, the Assyrian kingdom, the Assyrian empire, falls to the Babylonian empire. Babylon is the new world power in that part of the world. And Babylon now eventually starts knocking at the door of the southern kingdom of Judea. And we know that then in 586 BC, the southern kingdom of Judea, or Judah, is conquered in 586 BC. So this is the end of the line for the two kingdoms. Israel by the Assyrians in 722, Judah or Judea by the Babylonians in 586. Which I have to think, when we're talking BC, the bigger the number, the farther back. We have just like the old math line in math class. So this is the 8th century BC. This is the 6th century BC. And that's where we ended up last night. And that period, once the Babylonians capture Judah, they don't just capture it, they destroy Solomon's temple. This magnificent temple that Solomon had built, of cedar, and with gold and silver and bronze and all these, this magnificent thing that Solomon had built is destroyed, and all the precious metals are taken back to Babylon. All the ornaments and plates and cups and all the other things that were used by the priest are all taken back to Babylon, and the temple is left in ruins. And the people, especially the best people, the cream of the crop, the strong young men, the beautiful young women, they're taken as slaves to Babylon. And that's what's called the Babylonian captivity. Now, we're going to get to the book of Psalms here in a couple of weeks, but look to Psalm 137. Because there's 150 Psalms, and we won't be covering all of them when we talk about Psalms. But I want to especially lift up Psalm 137, which, now that it makes a lot more sense in context. If you're just reading through the book of Psalms, the historical context of the Psalms doesn't always resonate. And of course, we attribute lots of the Psalms to David, but not all of them. They're written at different times. The book of Psalms is the songbook of the people of Israel. And so the songs relate to lots of different things. And we'll talk about that later on. But look at Psalm 137, which is thinking about this period where the Jews are in Babylon. Look at these words. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. Zion is the hill that the temple sits on. There on the poplars we hung our harps. For there our captors asked of us songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." And you might say, "Now, what's going on here?" Okay, to put this in a modern let's imagine you are in a North Vietnamese concentration camp. Okay? You're in the Hanoi Hilton, and one of the people, the guard, says, "Hey, why don't you sing that Star Spangled Banner of yours? Why don't you sing America the Beautiful? Why don't you sing This Land Is My Land? You're from Oklahoma, aren't you? Why don't you sing Oklahoma?" As you're sitting in captivity in North Vietnam. That's what our tormentors are saying. Sing one of those songs of Zion. Sing what the songs of Zion are the songs of triumph. You know, the songs of Zion are the songs about how powerful God is, the victory of the Lord. So their tormentors are taunting them, saying, "Sing the songs of Zion." How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth, if I do not remember you. If I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, what the Edomites did on the day Jerusalem fell. They're referring to the Babylonians here as Edomites, as in they are, descendants of that ancient people. "Tear it down," they cried. "Tear it down to its foundations. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to destruction, happy is he who repays you for what you've done to us. He who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks." And you read that and you go, yikes. I mean, because you're reading a psalm and it ends with the wish to take babies and throw them against the rocks. But that's because the utter frustration and anger that the Jewish captives felt under captivity in Babylon, the anger they felt for their captors, for their conquerors, who had destroyed their city, destroyed their temple, and now were their tormentors. So this psalm is a psalm of anguish. Not all psalms are praise the Lord. Not all psalms are happy psalms. We wouldn't use this as our call to worship on a Sunday morning like we do other psalms. I don't think responsibly, and let us crash the babies against the rocks. I mean, that would not be appropriate to open worship with Psalm 137. But there are psalms like this because the Psalms is the record of the people's highs and lows, joys and triumphs and defeats. And that's why some of the Psalms they're called usually the deprecatory Psalms, which is just a fancy way of saying the angry Psalms that are about God strike down our enemies, God strike down the evil ones, God strike down those who are, our tormentors. So imagine, the Jews have been carted off into bondage in Babylon. And this is, you might say, well, this is the end of the story. Israel's gone, Judah's gone. But of course, it's not the end of the story, and that's where we're going to talk tonight. And I looked for a timeline chart that would be simple. I mean, some of them are so detailed some are so detailed that you might need it. That they're hard to read, but this one combines, I think, information with relative simplicity. So this is where we're going to be tonight. Okay. Would you? Okay. So Just make sure this makes sense to you. Okay. The return from captivity timeline. We start over here with the exile. This is the exile, the Babylonian captivity. We're going to read primarily in two books tonight, Ezra and Nehemiah. We're going to read about the ability of the Jews to return to Jerusalem in approximately 536 BC. And then also the second wave of return, right around 458, almost 100 years later. Then the third return, about 444. So the first two returns are contained in the book of Ezra. The third return contained in the book of Nehemiah. Now, we'll get to Esther, I think, next week. But Esther occurs during this period. The book of Esther occurs during the time in which there are still many Jews living, not in Jerusalem, but in Esther's case, in Persia, under King Xerxes, which is the king that we read about in the book of Esther. So, and then what you see also in the red there is the Old Testament books of the prophets that correspond to that time period. You know, we're going to, and again, we'll get to these here in a few weeks, but the book of Haggai and the book of Zechariah, the timeline for those is during the time of Ezra. Ezra, Haggai, and Zechariah are all occurring during the same time. And then you get Malachi at the time right after Nehemiah. And if that's confusing, let me give you a chart to make that less confusing. Okay? This will help, I think. I was going to wait to give you this, but this will make, some of this will make more sense now, I think. So, because as I've told you, the books, the Bible, the books of the Bible in the Old Testament are not chronological, which makes sometimes it difficult to know where are we in terms of a timeline or a chronology. So charts like this are helpful, I think, to sort it out and make it a little more to our Western mind, which want things to be chronological.
They're sharing.
Okay. Okay, this is a chart of prophets. So hang on to this one for a few weeks at least. Because here's what we got. We've got the name of a prophet, whether they were active as a prophet to the northern kingdom of Israel, to the southern kingdom of Judah, to the exiles in Babylon, or in a couple of cases, for example, Jonah is listed here as a prophet. He goes to the country of Nineveh. And Nineveh is part of Assyria. You know, Jonah's story, we'll talk about that too. But, you know, Jonah with the whale or the big fish. The last three on this chart, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, are the ones that correspond to the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay? Because this chart is chronological. So we go all the way back on the top to Elijah. We talked about Elijah last week. Elijah, his story is found in the books of Kings. And remember, he has the showdown with Ahab and Ahab's wife Jezebel. So, if you look at that first line, Elijah is a prophet. He's prophesying to the northern kingdom, which is Israel. Who were the kings during Elijah's time? Ahab, Ahaziah, and Joram are the kings of Israel during the time of Elijah. What is the time of Elijah's prophetic word? approximately 870 BC to 845 BC. And just in case you're wondering, where was Elijah born? Tishbe. Okay? I'm not sure if that last one is terribly, important to us. But then we know, well, when Elijah is taken off in a chariot of fire, he is succeeded by Elisha. He also prophesies to the northern kingdom. The kings who were the kings of the northern kingdom of Israel by that time, Joram, Jehu, Jehoaz. He prophesies. He takes over from Elijah in 845 approximately, all the way to 800, so 45 years, and he's born in Abel Maholah. And you just go down here. We'll get to the books of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Jump on down to Daniel. Daniel's takes place during the exile. Daniel, if you remember, Daniel is, talking to Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. And, it's Nebuchadnezzar who wants Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to, bow down or else be thrown into the fiery furnace. So Daniel is a prophet during the time of the exile in Babylon. And you just keep going on down until you get down to those last three. And you notice the last three are after the end of the kingdoms. And the person that is sort of in charge of Judea during that time is Governor Zerubbabel. We'll talk about Zerubbabel. That's one of those neat Bible names that. So anyway, this chart, these two charts together, hopefully, you put these two together, make sense of it. And you don't have to remember everything about these. Just remember, we're talking now, tonight, about after the kings, after the fall of the north and the south, after the Babylonian captivity, when they wept by the rivers of Babylon, that we read about in Psalm 137, now we're going to come to the return. So look at Ezra. And Ezra, because if you're wondering about the layout of the Bible, Ezra and Nehemiah are considered books of history. And that's why they follow 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. So we have these books of history that end with Nehemiah. Then we have books that are a little harder to classify. Esther is a tale told during the time of Jews in Persia. Job is a story that is an ancient story that is frankly hard to place in any particular historical setting because Job is an epic poem. If you read Job, it's not read as history, it's read as a poem. So it's kind of difficult to pigeonhole. Then we have the songbook of Psalms. Then we have, the wise sayings of Proverbs. Then we have the very depressing book of Ecclesiastes. Then we have the book of romance and sex called Song of Solomon. Then, after Song of Solomon, we come to the prophetic books, the books of prophets. And that's where we start with Isaiah, which is the longest of the prophetic books. And after Isaiah, we come to Jeremiah, etc., until we get all the way to those books at the end that are really short. But they jump around chronologically. So Ezra and Nehemiah are the last of the history books. Then you have these other books in the middle. Then we get to the books of the prophets. And that's why this chart with all the names of the prophets, we're going to be going back. Like when we read the book of Isaiah, we're going to be going back to the 8th century BC. Okay? When we read about Jeremiah, we'll be going back to the 7th century BC, etc. We'll be going back to these times that were covered in Kings, but now looking at them through the lens of the prophets. I don't say this multiple times, but just remember, a prophet, we grow up, I think sometimes we hear the word prophet, and we think somebody who like forecasts the future, like somebody who predicts, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. Sometimes that's true, but more often than not, a prophet is not so much about foretelling the future as saying, if you keep doing X, Y is going to happen. If you keep going down this path, this is going to be the result. A prophet was more about warning people, especially the people of Israel and Judah. If you, for example, if you keep going in idolatry and shunning the Lord, it's going to be disaster. So it's not so much when you think like a fortune teller or something. A prophet is more a red light, a warning signal, trying to get people to wake up and turn around and come back to the right path. Now sometimes there is what we might think of as a more forecasting the future kinds of things among prophecy. But most of prophecy is warning. So let's look at Ezra. So Ezra, we find out right off the bat that when does this occur? In the Ezra 1:1, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. What happened? We talked about the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrian Empire is conquered by the Babylonian Empire. The Babylonian Empire is conquered by the Persian Empire. Cyrus, king of Persia. Persia, we today would call what? Iran. So Assyria is Syria, Babylon is Iraq, Persia is Iran. So these three empires, Assyria conquered by Babylonia or Babylon, Babylon conquered by Persia. So Persia, the battle that I thought I wrote down the date. Well, I'll have to get back on the date of that. Oh no, the date of Cyrus conquers Babylon. Cyrus, king of Persia, conquers Babylon in 539 BC. And at the time, Babylon controlled not only Iraq, it by that time controlled Syria, because they had conquered the Assyrians. It covered Lebanon, and it covered Israel. So Cyrus, king of Persia, conquers Babylon in 539, and that gives him control of Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel. So in the first year of Cyrus, and real quick, just as a side note, go to Jeremiah for just a second before we go for it. Go to Jeremiah 29. Jeremiah 29:10. Because look at your chart. Jeremiah is talking about the future. And we'll talk about Jeremiah more, but just this one little piece of Jeremiah, Jeremiah 29:10. Jeremiah 29:10. This is what a word of prophecy to the people in exile from Jeremiah. This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I'll come to you and fulfill my gracious promise to bring you back to this place. Jeremiah is writing this as the Babylonians are invading and saying, this is what's going to happen. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. You've probably heard that verse pulled out of context, right? I know the plans I have for you. Then you'll call upon me and come and pray to me, and I'll listen to you, and you'll seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I'll be found by you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back from captivity. I'll gather you from all the nations and places where I have banished you, declares the Lord, and bring you back to the place from which I have carried you into exile. So even as the Babylonians are attacking, Jeremiah basically says, you're going to go into exile, but God will bring you out of exile after 70 years. Well, it's not exactly 70 years, but it's pretty close. And so in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, so if you want to make a note in your Bible, like I do, the word of the Lord spoken to Jeremiah that it's referencing is Jeremiah 29:10. The Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, and made a proclamation throughout his realm and put it in writing. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says. Yahweh, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any one of his people among you, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem in Judah and build the temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who is in Jerusalem. And the people of any place where survivors may now be living are to provide him with silver and gold, with goods and livestock, with freewill offerings for the temple of the God in Jerusalem. So, Cyrus says that the Jewish captives, if they want to go back to Judea, are allowed to go back and are allowed to rebuild the temple that the Babylonians destroyed. Cyrus gives a proclamation that the Jews can return and begin to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. And it says, the family heads of Judah and Benjamin, this is, remember, the only two remaining tribes, the priests and the Levites, everyone whose heart God had moved, prepared to go up and build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. All their neighbors assisted them with articles of silver and gold, goods and livestock, valuable gifts, in addition to all the freewill offerings. Moreover, King Cyrus brought out the articles belonging to the temple of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem and had placed in the temple of his God. So, when the Babylonians sacked the temple, all the precious things, the gold and the silver, candlesticks, and all that kind of stuff, had been carted to Babylon and put in a Babylonian temple. Now that Persia has conquered Babylon, Cyrus has given permission to take those articles back to Jerusalem and back to the Jewish temple. Cyrus, the king of Persia, had brought by Mithridath the treasurer, who counted them out, to Sheshbazzar, prince of Judah, and this was the inventory. And then we're like, wow. And then we got, one of those parts of the Bible is like, not gripping reading, because it's, well, how many gold dishes were there? Well, there were 30. How many silver dishes? Well, 1,000. How many silver pans? 29. I mean, this is an inventory list, which doesn't make, I say, the most riveting reading. Then, by tribe, not the 12 tribes, but the smaller tribe within a tribe, the clans, well, how many people went back from each of these families? Well, here we go in chapter 2. All these names and all these numbers, this is how many people from this family traveled back to Jerusalem. So again, not probably what we would find, might be good bedtime reading if you want to go to sleep. But notice how they parcel them out, Verse 21, this is the people from Bethlehem. Verse 36, these are the priests. Verse 40, the Levites. Verse 41, the singers. Verse 42, the gatekeepers. Verse 43, the temple servants. Verse 55, the descendants of the servants of Solomon. Verse 58, the temple servants and descendants of the servants of Solomon, etc., etc., etc. And all the names of the families and how many people from all these different groups traveled back to Judea. And then we get to the end of chapter 2, when they arrive, 2:68. When they arrived, oh, by the way, 64, it says, everybody, put it all together, there's 42,000 people. Okay? Or 42,360 people. When they arrived at the house of the Lord in Jerusalem, some of the heads of families gave freewill offerings toward the rebuilding of the house of God on its site. And according to their ability, they gave this much money. And it says they, the priests and the Levites and the singers and the gatekeepers, all these people settled in and made houses for themselves. So some of the people, not all of the people, but some of the people, 42,000 people, have now returned to Jerusalem. And their first order of business is to rebuild the altar, which they do in chapter 3. Then they build an altar, they offer burnt offerings, and they don't have a temple yet, they just have an altar. 3:6, on the first day of the 7th month, they began to offer burnt offerings to the Lord, though the foundation of the Lord's temple had not yet been laid. And then we read about they give money to masons and carpenters, and they get logs, and they start this project. When they lay the foundation, verse 10, 3:10, they lay the foundation of the temple. So, basically, the analogy would be pouring the concrete of the slab when we are building something today. I remember when I was a pastor in Oklahoma City, we built a brand new church, and I remember them pouring that first slab, and then we never had to go out and stand on the slab. That was so they build the foundation, and once they have the foundation, they have a big celebration. 3:10, the priests are there, and they get musical instruments, and they praise God. God is good. His love endures forever. And here's something that was pointed out to me when I was in seminary. This is midway through 11. The people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. But many of the older priests and Levites and family heads who had seen the former temple wept aloud when they saw the foundation of this temple being laid. While many others shouted for joy. No one could distinguish the sounds of the shouts of joy from the sound of weeping, because the people made so much noise, and the sound was heard far away. Now, I didn't understand this until somebody explained it to me. What do you think's going on here?
It's smaller. The temple's smaller. It won't have the glory that the old one had.
Exactly. The second temple is so poor compared to Solomon's temple. It's so, they're using, any material they can find. They're a bunch of, refugees basically. The second temple is a shadow of Solomon's temple. And so the old people who remember Solomon's temple, when they see this foundation, they're like, oh, it's just so much less. But the young people who've never had a temple, they think it's great. They're shouting for joy, and the old people are weeping when they remember the old temple. So some people are weeping, and some people are crying for joy in this situation. But not everybody's happy about this. There are people there who are some of the people that were left behind, some of the people from the north, some of the people who for the last 70 years have been living there, and they're not exactly happy now about this group coming back. Many of them have intermarried with other people. Many of them have started to adopt other practices. Many of them have become the leaders of what's left of the community. And it says, this referred here as the enemies of Judah. When the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles were building a temple for the Lord, the God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel and the heads of the families and said, well, let us help you build, because, we seek your God. We've been sacrificing to him since the time of the king of Assyria, who brought us here. Okay? What would we later call these people? The Samaritans. Right. This is the Samaritans. This is the people who are the offspring of the remnant of the northern tribes and all the foreign people that were carted in by the Assyrians. And now, since from the time of 722 to now, approximately, well, what do we say on this chart? Approximately the year 536. So, a couple of hundred years. The remainder, the people who are left behind in the northern tribes, have now had 200 years of intermarriage with all these foreign people, and they've created this hybrid religion. It's got some elements of Judaism and the worship of God, of Yahweh, of the Lord, but it's all mixed in with elements of other religions too. And that's what the Samaritans are. And so the Samaritans show up and say, well, our forefathers were a part of this whole deal, and they say, well, we'll help. Because we've set up our own sanctuary back from the time of the Assyrians. And Zerubbabel, and by the way, Zerubbabel is the one that has been given, we call him the governor. I think in this chart, he's referred to as Governor Zerubbabel. He is the Jewish guy in charge. Ezra is a priest. So Ezra is not a political leader. Zerubbabel is the political leader. Zerubbabel is actually the grandson of the last king of Judah, the one who was carted off into slavery. So he is still part of the line of David. So Zerubbabel and the rest of the families of Israel said, you have no part with us in building a temple to our God. We alone will build it for Yahweh, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, commanded us. So basically, they snubbed this offer, as it was put to me one time, they basically said, well, we don't need your half-breed help. And so then the people around them set out to discourage the people of Judah and make them afraid to go on building. They hired counselors to work against them and frustrate their plans during the entire reign of Cyrus, king of Persia, and down to the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Now, I have a little note here that I think is kind of helpful. It says, the different strategies that were used to hinder these people. 1, offer help that will lead to compromises, or even a complete takeover of the project by unbelievers. 2, discourage, frighten, and frustrate God's people. 3, use official power to force them to stop. Now as then, government and opposition groups use strategies to stop the work of believers. So this begins now a power struggle between the exiles under the religious leadership of Ezra and the political leadership of Zerubbabel against these people who've been there the whole time, who don't want this temple to be rebuilt. Since they've been rebuffed, they're like, well, we're not going to let this happen. So they start trying to undermine the effort. And they even write a letter to the king, who by this time is no longer, by this time it's Artaxerxes. If you look at the kings, see how much time has passed. You go from Cyrus to Darius to Xerxes to Artaxerxes. This is the letter they write. This is in 4:12. The king should know that the Jews who came up to us from you have gone to Jerusalem and are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. They're restoring the walls and repairing the foundations. Furthermore, the king should know that if this city is built and its walls are restored, no more taxes, tribute, or duty will be paid, and the royal revenues will suffer. Now, since we're under obligation to the palace, and it's not proper for us to see the king dishonored, we're sending this message to inform the king, so that a search may be made in the archives of your predecessors. In these records, you'll find that this city is a rebellious city, troublesome to kings and provinces, a place of rebellion from ancient times. That's why the city was destroyed. We inform the king that if this city is built and its walls restored, you'll be left with nothing in Trans-Euphrates. So they are trying to do everything they can to stop this rebuilding project. And luckily, we're told that this is issued, and so the king says, oh, well, okay, 4:12, issue an order that these men are to stop work so the city won't be rebuilt. Be careful not to neglect this. Why should this threat grow to the detriment of the royal interest? But, so they're forced to stop. Now, chapter 5. Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the prophet, which again, compared to our little chart here, Haggai and Zechariah are the prophets, and we have their own books in here. They say to the Jews, basically encourage them, and we have some sort of political. The governor of the Trans-Euphrates area says to them, to the Jews, 5:3, midway through, who authorized you to rebuild this temple and restore this structure? What are the names of the men constructing the building? But the eyes of their God was watching over the elders and the Jews, and they hadn't stopped until the report could go to Darius and his written reply be received. So, they find out that they said, this is the letter they sent to Darius. And it's a little confusing because some of this is a little bit out of chronology. Because really, by the time of Artaxerxes, we're talking about the rebuilding of the city. Here we're back to talking about the building of the temple. And we kind of go back and forth, and it's a little confusing because some of the documentation is not exactly chronological. It says, the king should know, this is 5:8, that we went to the district of Judah, to the temple of the great God. The people are building it with large stones and placing the timbers in the wall. It's being carried on with diligence. We're making progress. And basically they say, well, we were authorized to do this by Cyrus way back when. And I'm like, really? Well, long story short, Darius says, is that true? Did Cyrus authorize this? Look at 6:1. Darius issued an order. They searched the archives stored in the treasury at Babylon. A scroll was found in the citadel of Ecbatana in the province of Media, and it was written, and it basically says, here's what Cyrus decreed that they could do this. So they found the documentation in the archives that Cyrus had indeed authorized the project. Now, this may sound like, the way we deal with city councils today. I mean, it may not sound like the most riveting spiritual passage you've ever read in the Bible, but my Bible has this little note. It says, in made-up legends, there's no need for insignificant, divergent details. All the loose ends tie up neatly. Real life, however, is messier. Ezra records a typical example. A document was searched for in Babylon. It unexpectedly turned up in remote Ecbatana, where history records that Cyrus spent the summer of his first year as king. Such details suggest that Ezra is based on accurate and detailed historical sources. So, this odd, where did they find Cyrus's, where did they find this document where Cyrus had authorized the building project? Well, they found it in his summer residence, where everybody knew that Cyrus would spend this time. I mean, so you might say, well, this is all kind of complicated and maybe not, the most spiritual thing in the world, but it shows the historicity of all of this story. That Cyrus authorizes this program, and there's lots of local opposition, and this is the story of Ezra and Nehemiah. The attempt to rebuild in the face of local opposition. And then, so Darius, once he discovers the documentation, look at 6:11. He's found the edict. I decree that anyone changes this edict, a beam is to be pulled from his house, he should be lifted up and impaled on it. So, if it is a crime, his house will be made a pile of rubble. May God, who has caused his name to dwell there, overthrow any king or people who lifts a hand to change this decree or destroy this temple in Jerusalem. I, Darius, have decreed it, let it be carried out with diligence. So, they rebuild the temple. Now, a lot of this has been telescoped down. The bottom line we'll find out from reading some of the other books, especially the prophetic books, is what happens is the exiles get there, they lay the foundation, and then they kind of forget about it for a while. And they start building their own houses and planting their own fields, and it takes some time for them to actually construct the temple. It happens over several decades, actually. This is all kind of condensed into a fairly short book here, but it does eventually happen. And we find out that in 615 it was finally completed on the 3rd day of the month of Adar in the 6th year of the reign of Darius. So, think about how long that is. Cyrus in his first year says they can go back. It's not until the 6th year of Darius that it's actually completed. And you look about how many years that is, that's over 100 years from the time of the actual proclamation till the time of the completion of the temple. So, all of that to say, remember, the name of this book is what? Ezra. Who have we not seen yet? Ezra. Right? It's not the book of Zerubbabel, but he's, and someone says, if you remember how to, Zerubbabel, he found the temple was a big pile of rubble. So, after these things, chapter 7, during the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra, son of all these guys, arrives. It has Ezra, son of Aaron the priest. He was a teacher well versed in the law of Moses, which the Lord, the God of Israel, had given. So, long after the initial events, Ezra comes. And that's why it says here, the first 6 chapters are about rebuilding the temple. 7 through 10 are about restoring the law. And that's why this chart has it this way. Because, and we think, why is some of this important? Well, because for them to be a people, they go from being exiles to refugees, and now they've reclaimed their homeland, but without any kind of center of worship, and then eventually without a city, they're not really a people. Especially in the midst of all these hostile forces. So they need to build the temple. And then they need to rebuild the city. But more important than either of those things really is they need to remember the law. They need to remember what God has commanded them. So Ezra comes finally, and his job is to help the people know who they are. Know the law. And he starts to investigate, and he starts to then tell the people, well, this is the law. This is what you are supposed to be doing. This is what God has said to do. And that's what we have basically in the later part of the book of Ezra. Ezra's job is to try to restore the law. And one of the things that he finds out is the people who've returned have already fallen into bad practices. Look at chapter 9. And this is now Ezra speaking in first person. The leaders came to me and said, the people of Israel, including the priests and the Levites, have not kept themselves separate from the neighboring peoples with their detestable practices, like those of the Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, Ammonites, Moabites, Egyptians, and Amorites. They've taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves and their sons. They've mingled the holy race with the people around them. The leaders and officials have led the way in this unfaithfulness. And Ezra says, when I heard this, I tore my tunic. I pulled hair from my head and my beard. I sat down appalled. And he's like, y'all are not following the law. So he starts to try and tell them, And he tells them they need to separate themselves from their foreign wives, which sounds kind of harsh. But this is one of the main problems, is they've intermarried with these foreign people, and that brings in foreign religion. And he said, you gotta stop doing that. So before I'm out of time, we gotta turn the page to Nehemiah. Because Nehemiah is a book about building a wall. And you might think, that really sounds like a pretty dull book. A book about building a wall. But given what we already know about the hostility of the people who never left, the difficulty they had in building the temple, we come to Nehemiah, and Nehemiah is all written in first person by Nehemiah. And look at Nehemiah 1. The words of Nehemiah. In the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, when I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanea, this is Hanani. Susa is in Persia. Okay, this is Persia, Iran. Hanani, I guess is actually the pronunciation. Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men. I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, those who survived the exile are back in the province, are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed. And he prays, and now he is a high official in the court of the king of Persia. So chapter 2. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes of Persia, wine was brought for him. I took the wine and gave it to the king. So he's kind of like one of the, guys who's inner circle of the king. I had not been sad in his presence before. So the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you're not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart. I was very much afraid. I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my fathers are buried, so that I can rebuild it. And he basically then keeps saying, the king says, well, how long are you going to be gone? And when are you going to be back? And he starts asking for stuff. Asking for safe conduct, asking for timber. And he says there in verse 8, because the gracious hand of God was on me, the king granted my request. And he gave me letters, and he sent army and cavalry with me. And then verse 10. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. These are local politicians in Judah. Again, but you notice they're not Israelites. They are local politicians who do not want the walls of Jerusalem rebuilt. Because they do not want the people of Israel to be unified in a walled city. They see this as a threat to their control, because they are local politicians who don't want this opposition to their power. So Nehemiah travels to Jerusalem, and he starts inspecting it, and he sees that the whole thing is just falling down. And he says, verse 17, 2:17, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins. Its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild. The walls of Jerusalem will no longer be in disgrace. So they said, well, let's start rebuilding. So, but, verse 19, when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite and Gershom the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. What is this you're doing? Are you rebelling against the king? And they said, no, the God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. As for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it. This isn't your place. This is our place. And you don't have any claim over this land. And you can see, again, things change, but people don't change. And, the local politicians are not going to give up their power easily. So, we're told they start rebuilding the gates. And it's funny, verse 3:1, the sheep gate. 3:3, the fish gate. 3:6, the Gehenna gate. 3:13, the valley gate. 3:14, the dung gate. That's like the low job, I guess. 15, the fountain gate, etc., etc. 28, the horse gate. So they start rebuilding gates. Chapter 4, when Sanballat heard they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews in the presence of his associates in the army of Samaria. See, Samaria. He said, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish it in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, what they're building, if even a fox climbed on it, he'd break down the wall of stones. Like, they don't know what they're doing, and anything they build is going to fall over. This is a ridiculous thing. But they keep at it. The Jews keep building the wall. And they start making progress. 4:7, when all these guys heard that the repairs to Jerusalem walls had gone ahead and the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. They plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. Someone pointed out this interesting. The two things are not exclusive. Praying and posting a guard. They did both. They didn't just pray and they didn't just post a guard. They prayed and they posted a guard. But then the reality, verse 10, 4:10. The people of Judah said, "The strength of the laborers is given out. There's so much rubble, we can't rebuild the wall." Also, our enemies said, "Before they know it or see us, we'll be right there among them and we'll kill them and put an end to the work." And the Jews who lived near said, "Wherever you turn, they'll attack us." So, what does Nehemiah do? He says, well, all right, don't be afraid. Verse 16, "From that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor." So he divides his workforce into builders and armed guards to protect the builders from the enemies. It says, "The officers posted themselves behind all the people of Judah who were building the wall. Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other hand." So imagine you're on a construction crew. You got a shovel in one hand and a sword in the other. But that's what they have to do, because they have so much opposition to building this wall. It says, like verse 31, "We continued the work with half the men holding spears from the light of dawn till the stars came out." And so this goes on, and they keep building. In the meantime, they also know that there are some of the people who are building are flat broke. And what we find out is that there are a few wealthy Jewish families, and most of the other Jewish families who live there are very poor, and some of these rich Jewish families are, charging high rates of interest and getting them to sell them their land and getting them to sell them their children into slavery. And Nehemiah is pretty upset about that. Verse 5:4, some of these, 5:3. Well, actually, let's look at the beginning of 5. 5:1, I'll keep going up. The men and their wives raised a great outcry against their Jewish brothers. Some were saying, "We and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain." Others were saying, "We're mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine." Others were saying, "We had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards. Although we are of the same flesh and blood as our countrymen, and though our sons are as good as theirs, we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have been enslaved. We're powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others." When I heard their outcry and these charges, I was very angry. I pondered them in my mind and accused the nobles and officials. I told them, "You're exacting usury from your own countrymen." Usury being unjust interest. I called together a large meeting. "As far as possible, we've brought back our Jewish brothers who were sold to the Gentiles. Now you're selling your brothers only for them to be sold back to us." In other words, how can you do this to each other? They kept quiet because they could find nothing to say. So, Nehemiah preaches a hellfire and brimstone sermon and says, if we're fighting each other and you're cheating and driving your fellow Jews into poverty over this, we're never going to succeed. And here's a little note in my Bible that kind of explains this a little better. Nehemiah faced a daunting task similar to that confronting many leaders of developing countries today. The land was devastated, with all wealth concentrated in the hands of a few powerful families. Jews were mortgaging their property, even selling their children into slavery in order to raise money and paying taxes. Nehemiah, who apparently came from wealth, could have profited further from his political position. Instead, he set a sterling example of generosity and self-sacrifice that made a profound impression on his oppressed countrymen. He makes a point to record, he did not acquire any land. He fed 150 people every day. Chapter 6, there's even more continued opposition to the building. And so they try another route. The opponents of Nehemiah try to send a letter back to Persia accusing Nehemiah of rebellion. This is 6:5. "It is reported among the nations," and Geshem says it's true, "that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and therefore you're building the wall. Moreover, according to these reports, you're about to become their king, and have even appointed prophets to make this proclamation about you in Jerusalem. There's a king in Judah. Now this report will get back to the king, so come, let us confer together." This is a report. They say, "We hear you're plotting a rebellion. You're going to have yourself declared king. So we're going to tell the king on you unless you come and meet with us so we can kill you." But Nehemiah doesn't fall for it. He says, "Nothing like what you're saying is happening. You're just making it up out of your head. That's not going to work." And they try all kinds of other tricks to stop the construction, but they don't succeed. 6:15. "The wall was completed on the 25th of Elul in 52 days." So this pretty expansive project is completed in 52 days. Now, again, you might say, well, it's a whole book about building a wall. But someone said it's almost like a wall to them would be like a border for us to a country. Not to get into politics, but if there's no borders, there's really no country. Well, in the ancient world, without a wall, there is no city. People are not going to live in the city if it doesn't have a wall. There's no protection, there's no unity. The only way they're going to have to rebuild themselves as a people is to have a temple and a city with a wall. And you might think, why is that necessary? Well, in that culture, if you didn't have a place of worship and you didn't have a city, a walled city, you can't get the people to all be unified and become a culture that is defined by a geographical boundary. And they had to have a walled city, and they had to get the people to move into it and live there so that they could still be a people. Because the northern 10 tribes, they just had faded into, genetic, washing away. They were no longer a people. The difference was the exiles in Judea were determined to stay Jewish. And now that they've returned to Jerusalem, the only way to stay Jewish, to stay a people, was to be together, to worship together, to live together, to have a physical border of some kind. And that's why this wall was so important. Now, we get another chapter of names. And we find out that in chapter 8, Ezra, because Ezra is a religious leader, Nehemiah is more of a political leader. Ezra reads the law to the people. Once they get the walls rebuilt, Ezra reads the law to the people. And the people, when they hear the law, some of them start weeping because realizing how far they've drifted from the law. 8, 9. Actually, 8:8. They read from the book of the law of God, making it clear and giving the meaning so that the people could understand what was being read. They didn't just read it, they explained to the people the laws of Moses. Then Nehemiah the governor, and Ezra the priest and scribe, and the Levites who were instructing the people, said to them, "This day is sacred to the Lord your God. Don't mourn or weep." For all the people had been weeping as they listened to the words of the law. Nehemiah said, "Go and enjoy choice food and sweet drinks, and send some to those who have nothing prepared. This day is sacred to our Lord. Do not grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." And that phrase I've seen on plaques and banners, the joy of the Lord is your strength. But notice, we sometimes think of worship as somehow, gloomy, or at least some people do, but he says, no, now that you've heard the law, let's have a feast, let's have sweet drinks, let's, don't mourn, let's have a party. The Levites calmed the people, saying, "Be still, this is a sacred day, don't grieve." Verse 12, all the people went away to eat and drink, to send portions of food, to celebrate with great joy, because they now understood the words that had been made known to them. So, these two books are about rebuilding the temple, rebuilding the walls, but more important than either, rebuilding the religion. And this part of it is actually the most important, rebuilding the religion. And they go on, and now they have to start sacrificing and celebrating the holidays and practicing Judaism. And that's what they begin to do. And there's a lengthy prayer, and the people are saying, yes, 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 well, we're going to be good now. And then the chapter 11 is again a list of names, and chapter 12 is a list of names, and then chapter 12:27 is they dedicate the wall, and they have a big celebration here. They get 2 groups of singers, and they circle the wall, and 12:31. I had the leaders of Judah go up on top of the wall. I assigned 2 large choirs to give thanks. One was to proceed on top of the wall to the right, towards the dung gate, and all these guys were with them. And then the other choir, verse 38, the second choir proceeded in the opposite direction, and I followed them on top of the wall, and this is where they went. In verse 40, the 2 choirs that gave thanks took their places in the house of God, along with all these other people, and they sang, and they offered sacrifices, and it was a big party. And you think, you kind of want to go, the end. You wish it ended with chapter 12. Because they finished the wall, they had a big party, they had choirs, they had parties and celebrations, and everybody was happy. And then, we're just kind of given as a little sort of PS at the end, some of the stuff that afterwards happened that they started disobeying again. This one fella was building himself a house inside the temple and was skimming things off the top. They found out the Levites weren't being paid. 13:6. While all this was going on, I was not in Jerusalem. For in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had returned, it should be king of Persia actually, I had returned to the king. Sometime later I asked his permission and came back to Jerusalem. Here he learns about some of these problems, and he's upset. And then he also finds out in 13:15, they're working on the Sabbath. In those days I saw men in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath, bringing in grain and loading it on donkeys. All these things are happening on the Sabbath. People are buying and selling on the Sabbath, and he lays into them. Some of them are still marrying foreign women, verse 23, and he's upset about that. And he kind of keeps saying, I tried, God. Remember me, Lord. Show me mercy. I tried. I did my best. This little note in my Bible, again, I think is real pertinent. My Bible has this little note in chapter 13. Fairy tales end, and they lived happily ever after. But real life never does. Pointedly, Nehemiah's book doesn't close with the triumph of chapter 12, with a preview of the continuing hassles of leadership. The continuing hassles of leadership. Old problems reoccurred, new problems sprang up, and Nehemiah tackled both with kinds of courage and wisdom. So he came back and found out some of the stuff he had warned them about had cropped up, and he waded into that and tried to fix it. And that's, as I said, that's what leadership is. It's not you fix it once and it stays fixed forever. You fix it and it comes loose, and you fix it again and it comes loose, and you fix it again, and that's what Nehemiah does. So these books are not maybe as thrilling as some of the other books in the Bible, but let's look just for a minute at these two, because down the road we're going to look at some of the books of prophecy. Let's look at Haggai and Zechariah for just a minute, because these are two of the books of prophecy that occur, are happening at the same time as these books, and they're towards the end of the Old Testament. These books. Matter of fact, Malachi is the last book of the Old Testament, and you go back one from that and you get to Zechariah, and you go back one from that and you get to Haggai. So Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi are the last three books of the Old Testament. And Haggai is a very short book. It's only 2 chapters. But it kind of points out one of the problems, that the people, when they went back, were more interested in building their own houses than rebuilding the temple. Look at Haggai 1:2. This is what the Lord Almighty says. These people say, the time has not yet come for the Lord's house to be built. And the word Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses while this house remains a ruin? In other words, the temple. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Be careful. Give careful thought to your ways. You've planted much, but you've harvested little. You eat, but you never have enough. You drink, but you never have your fill. You put on clothes, but you're not warm. You earn wages, only to put them in a purse with holes in it. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. Go up into the mountains, bring down timber, and build a house, so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored. You expected much, but see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home, I blew away. Why? Because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with his own house. So, this is the prophet saying, you came here and you had all this energy to build the temple, but you haven't done it. You've been more focused on your own stuff. And you haven't been very successful. And part of that is because you have your priorities mixed up. And then see how all these books cross over with each other. 1:13, Haggai, the Lord's messenger, gave this message of the Lord to the people. I am with you, declares the Lord. So the Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, and the spirit of Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the spirit of the remnant of the people, and they came and began to work on the house of the Lord. So, this is the thrust of these 2 chapters of Haggai, is getting the people motivated to build the temple. Zechariah is a lot of weird imagery that we may talk about later when we get to the prophets, but the passage in Zechariah that I'd have us notice is a positive prophetic word in chapter 8. 8:3. This is what the Lord says. I will return to Zion and dwell in Jerusalem. Jerusalem will be called the city of truth. The mountain of the Lord Almighty will be called the holy mountain. Once again, men and women of ripe age will sit in the streets of Jerusalem, each with cane in hand because of his age. The city streets will be filled with boys and girls playing there. There's a prophecy about there's going to come a day when Jerusalem will be alive again. Jerusalem will live again. And there's a lot else in Zechariah that we'll cover some other time. Malachi is the last book of the Old Testament. We'll talk about it more. But it talks about even once they get the temple rebuilt, they're still off track. And it's all about Malachi saying to the people, and this is the people who have now rebuilt the temple and rebuilt the walls. He says, you're still showing contempt for me. 1:6. How have we shown contempt for your name? You placed defiled food on my altar. How have we defiled you? By saying that the Lord's table is contemptible. When you bring blind animals for sacrifice, is that not wrong? When you sacrifice crippled or diseased animals, is that not wrong? Try offering that to your governor. Would he be pleased with you? Will he accept you? So, jumping down to verse 13. When you bring injured, crippled, or diseased animals and offer them as sacrifices, should I accept them from your hands? So they were bringing to the temple their worst. Bringing an animal for sacrifice, like the ones that were diseased or crippled or some other messed up. That's what they were bringing for their sacrifices. And God was like, would you bring this to the governor? And they are not, he says, they are robbing him. Chapter 3:7. Ever since the time of your forefathers, you've turned away from my decrees and have not kept them. Return to me, and I'll return to you, says the Lord. But you ask, how are we to return? Will a man rob God? Yet you rob me. But you ask, how do we rob you? In tithes and offerings. You're under a curse, the whole nation of you, because you're robbing me. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty. See if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that you won't have enough room for it. So, not only were they bringing diseased animals, they weren't bringing their tithes to the temple. And God says, you're robbing me. So, this is the state of Judaism after the second temple. Now, spoiler alert, just as we move forward, just so you kind of get the scope of all this, we end with the exiles returning and rebuilding Jerusalem and rebuilding the temple, but the so-called second temple is not very good. It's not nowhere near the splendor of Solomon's temple. Israel is still under, in some ways, the control of the Persian Empire. And Israel's history is being under the control of one empire after another. After the Persians, there are other empires. Of course, there's eventually the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great. And of course, by the time we get to the New Testament, there is the Roman Empire. And it is a very rare thing for Israel to be independent after this. There's only very brief moments when Israel has any independence. They're always under the thumb of one empire or another. And of course, Rome being the biggest, baddest of all of them. This second temple, built here, gets a huge, magnificent renovation under who? Herod. Herod the Great. The same Herod who killed the babies in Bethlehem. The same Herod that was a vicious, paranoid, ruthless, awful man. But he was called Herod the Great because he built great things. And one of the things he did was he took it upon himself to try to bring the temple back to the splendor of Solomon. So they started calling the second temple, they started calling it Herod's temple by the time of Jesus. And of course, Herod's temple is itself destroyed by the Romans. The Romans destroy Herod's temple in approximately 70 AD. So the second temple, the one that was built here and then magnificently renovated by Herod, the second temple is torn down by the Romans in 70 AD, just a generation after Jesus. And if you go to the Holy Land now, all that's left of that second temple is one wall. And that's what they call the Western Wall. They call that the Wailing Wall. The Wailing Wall, the Western Wall in Jerusalem, is the only thing left of the second temple. And that's why pious Jews and Gentiles, for the Christians, go and pray at the wall, because it's the closest they can get to the old temple, the temple that we're talking about here. Well, that's all for now. Well, we'll talk about some of the more. So we finished the history books now, the Old Testament. So now we have some slightly different kinds of books. Next week we'll talk about Esther, which actually Esther is, if you've never really read Esther, Esther is one of my actually favorite books in the Old Testament. And I'll probably repeat this, but Esther was the book I learned to read Hebrew in. When I took Hebrew in seminary, Esther was our textbook. So I know Esther pretty well. Because I literally read it one word at a time. So we'll talk about Esther next week. Let's pray.